I owe an actress an apology. She'll never see this. She doesn't know I exist. And I still need to say it out loud because for years, I did something I'm not proud of. Thumb on the arrow, 30 seconds at a time. I used to skip her scenes. This is a show where a man's own mother sits down with his uncle and arranges to have him murdered. And the one person I couldn't stand to be in a room with was that woman's daughter, Janice. It took me an embarrassingly long time to work out that I'd been played, that an actress was doing something to me on purpose, and doing it better than almost anyone in that cast. I want to try and explain what I missed. Let me give you the size of what she walked into. By the year 2000, when Ida Turturro turns up at the start of season 2, this cast is already frightening. Gandolfini, Edie Falco, Nancy Marchand playing Livia so precisely that I once had to pause an episode and text my sister about our grandmother. Michael Imperioli, Dominic Chianese, Joe Pantoliano. I've been having the same top 5 argument with the same friend for about 10 years, and we have never once finished it. Turturro comes in as a working New York character actor, with over a decade of small parts behind her. She's the cousin of John and Nicholas Turturro. She already knew Gandolfini well. The two of them had acted opposite each other in the 1992 Broadway revival of A Streetcar Named Desire, years before any of this existed. And then she gets handed a job that took me years of rewatches to actually understand. Every performance I love in this thing is pulling the same way. There's a monster, the actor finds the person underneath, and I end up caring about a man who kills people for a living. Gandolfini walks that wire for 6 seasons, and it's the reason we're all still here talking about him. Turturro is pulling the opposite way, and it's so much harder than it looks. She's got an ordinary woman, no gun, no crew, no power of any kind. And her job is to make me hate that woman more than I hate the men who are actually burying bodies out in the Meadowlands. She does it for 72 episodes. 2 Emmy nominations, 2001 and 2007. She lost both times. Here's the first thing I missed, and once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. Janice is performing in almost every scene she's in, not as an actress, as a con artist. The grieving daughter, the spiritual seeker, the wounded party, the woman nobody understands. She's running a bit on somebody in nearly every room she enters, which means Aida Turturro's actual assignment is to give a bad performance, convincingly, inside a good one. And I want you to sit with how strange a thing that is to ask a human being to do. Start with the illnesses, because the show is meticulous about them. Janice claims she developed carpal tunnel syndrome working the steamed milk machine at an espresso bar out in Washington State. And she claims it hard enough to collect disability. She claims Epstein-Barr when she'd rather sleep than do anything for Bobby's kids. Something is always wrong with her, and nothing is ever wrong with her. Then there are the funerals. And Janice at a funeral is her own category. Season 3, Livia dies. Barbara has to tell Tony that Janice isn't planning to come, so he calls her in Seattle and orders her onto the next plane. And somewhere inside that phone call, she works him into paying for the ticket, her mother's funeral, and she comes out of it up the price of a flight. Livia had wanted no mass, no service, no wake. Janice overrules all of it and insists on something lavish. Then, at the gathering afterwards, with everyone in that house praying she won't, she herds the room into a remembrance, pushing Hesh to speak, then AJ, while not one person can think of a true kind thing to say about the woman in the ground. And somewhere in the middle of all this, she's down in Livia's basement, hammering at the wall, looking for money. And then the show does something to me that I resent every single time. After Livia dies, Janice finds out what her mother kept. Boxes of Tony's childhood things. Some of Barbara's. Nothing of hers. She's at Jackie Jr.'s wake, handing the funeral director a demo CD of her contemporary Christian music, mentioning that she wishes she'd had something like it at her own mother's send-off. And I laughed. And then I felt bad about laughing. And I think that's exactly the trap. Every one of those scenes has 2 things happening at once. The lie and the woman telling it. And Turturro keeps both of them visible. I can see through her. Nobody in the room can. That's a needle I don't know how to thread. And she threads it for 6 years without ever tipping into cartoon. Season 2, Episode 12. The Knight in White Satin Armor. Janice and Richie are engaged. They get into it over Richie's son, an aspiring ballroom dancer whose father has effectively written him off over suspicions about his sexuality. Janice takes the kid's side. Richie punches her in the mouth. Watch her face for the next 10 seconds. because it's the best acting in the episode and there's no dialogue in it. What she plays is shock, a long, flat, stunned beat where you can watch a woman recalculate her entire future in real time. She fought her family and her brother and everybody to be with this man, and she has just learned what that's going to cost her for the rest of her life. Then she gets up, walks out of the room, comes back with a gun, and shoots him in the chest. And then she calls Tony, and now she's falling apart on the phone. That's the third thing she's played in under 2 minutes. Terror, ice, collapse. The detail I love here is real, by the way. David Proval, who played Richie, had trained as an amateur boxer, and he could judge the distance of a punch well enough that they shot that moment without stunt doubles. 2 actors, 1 take, no net. Tony sends Christopher and Furio to make the body disappear and buys his sister a Greyhound ticket back to Seattle. She turns like that over and over. Season 5, Cold Cuts, might be my favorite example. And it's also the episode that made me start feeling sorry for her, which I hated. Janice attacks another parent at her stepdaughter's pee-wee soccer game, puts the woman in hospital, puts Tony's name on the local news. Bobby gives her an ultimatum, anger management or the marriage ends. And it works. That's the thing that gets me. It actually works. She gets calmer. She gets happier. She sits at dinner and lets small irritations roll off her. Tony can't stand it. So he starts on Harpo, her son, the boy she lost to her ex-husband, who ended up living on the street. Tony needles her. Then he needles harder. Then he does the French-Canadian accent. And Janice comes across that table at her brother with a fork in her fist, screaming. And then she just breaks. Tony walks home smiling. And here's the thing I want to say out loud, because I never see anyone say it. Her comedic timing might be the most underrated element in the entire show. She's funny in scenes where nobody else is allowed to be funny, and she never once winks at the camera to let you know she's in on it. Alright, let's do the ledger. Because I want to be fair to everyone who still can't stand her, and honestly, the ledger is horrifying. This show spends 6 seasons making one argument about organized crime. These men produce nothing. They extract. Their attacks on everyone standing near them, and Janice sits one rung further down than that, feeding off the people who feed off everybody else. Take the records. Before Livia died, she gave her phonograph collection to Svetlana, the Russian woman who actually looked after her at the end. Janice decides the records are hers by blood. Svetlana says no, so Janice steals Svetlana's prosthetic leg and holds it hostage. Svetlana has connections. 2 men break into Janice's house, slap her around until she gives up the location, a locker at a bowling alley, and leave her in the hospital. Tony shows up furious, because now he's choosing between a war with the Russians and losing face. All of it over some vinyl, over a woman's leg. Then there's Bobby, and this is the stretch I find genuinely hard to watch. Season 4, Karen Bacalieri is killed in a car crash. At the wake, the mob wives are quietly noting that Bobby was the only made man in the crew who never took a mistress. And of everyone in that room, the person it lands hardest on is Janice, who at that moment is sleeping with Ralph Cifaretto behind Rosalie's back. So she starts going round, ZD patrol, cooking for the widower, occasionally passing other women's dishes off as her own, quietly elbowing out the competition. And here's the part that complicates everything, because Bobby's grief actually gets to her. She sits with a man in real pain over a wife he loved, and something in her responds to it. She goes to her therapist and talks about the way she keeps choosing men who remind her of her father and her brother. And then she dumps Ralph, shoving him down half a flight of stairs at her mother's old house, supposedly for wearing his shoes indoors. And eventually she gets Bobby to eat the tray of ziti Karen left in the freezer, the last food that woman ever made for her family. When Bobby still won't commit, Janice escalates, and this is the moment I think she loses the audience forever. She instant messages his 2 grieving children under a fake screen name, one that reads as satanic, and describes objects she can see in their room from her own window so they'll believe something is watching them. She steers them toward a Ouija board. The kids come apart, and then Janice comes rushing over to comfort them and their father, and then the house. Season 6. Johnny Sacrimoni is in prison working out a plea, desperate to leave his family something. Janice tours Ginny Sack's home and makes a point of how much she loves it. Tony, who mostly just wants his sister off his back, folds it into the deal. He takes a lighter cut on a business Johnny needs sold, and Johnny sells the house at half price. Tony hands it straight to Janice. Ginny is close to tears as Janice moves in, and Janice thanks her brother and then dissolves into hysterical sobbing about how nobody understands what she goes through in the exact moment of getting everything she wanted. Almost none of that is carried by dialogue. It lives on her face. The writers handed her a ledger, and she turned it into a person. So here's the argument I've been having with the internet for years. Is Janice just Tony in a dress? Plenty of people say yes, and they make a strong case. Same grasping, same appetite, same instinct to consume whoever's closest. The difference is what's behind her. Tony has an organization that turns those traits into an asset, and Janice has nothing. So we get to see what those exact qualities do to a regular person out in the world, where they just make you a disaster. Plenty of other people say no, and I understand them too. Tony is capable of care. It's warped, and it's self-serving, and it's there. Where I've landed, after all these years with it, is somewhere sadder than either. Janice is the eldest. She had the longest exposure to unfiltered Livia and Johnny Boy, back before Tony was big enough to absorb any of it for her. And she wasn't only watching that house operate, she got used by it. Johnny Boy brought his daughter along to an amusement park, so the men had a reason to be there while they did business. The show says the quiet part out loud, too. After Richie dies, Tony confronts his mother about how she raised her children, and he means Janice specifically. And then look at Barbara, the youngest, who came out of that family more or less intact. A big part of the reason is that Tony stood in front of her. I think protecting his little sister might be the only thing that preserved whatever decency Tony has left. Nobody ever stood in front of Janice. She got raised to work her own family, and she was very, very good at it. Which brings me to the thing I actually wanted to tell you. I think how you feel about Janice is a test of how clearly you're seeing Tony. I failed it for about a decade. I hated her, and I excused him, and I fell for exactly what the show set up. The charisma, the therapy, the ducks, the size of the man. Chase built a character who does far worse things than his sister ever managed, and he got me rooting for the guy. Then he put Janice in the room with all the flattering light taken away. And then comes the finale, and she does the hardest thing she's ever been asked to do. Bobby is dead. Janice is a widow. She goes to a state care home to tell Uncle Junior, a man with advanced dementia who can barely hold a sentence, that his nephew has been killed. And partway through, the news becomes about her. I'm a widow, delivered to somebody who doesn't know who she is anymore. Then Uncle Pat warns Tony that Janice is circling the last of Junior's money. So Tony goes to see the man who shot him and tells him to leave whatever's left to Bobby's kids. And then Tony visits his sister, and she tells him she's going to raise Bobby's children, that she's done the therapy, that she's put their mother's warped stuff behind her, that she's a good mother now. And I have gone back to that scene again and again, and I still cannot tell you if she means it. 19 years of rewatches and arguments and threads, and nobody agrees. Grief, or one more angle, or the option that actually frightens me, both at the same time, in a woman who can no longer tell which is which. I always know when Tony means it. She's the only person on that show I can't read. She spent 6 seasons teaching me to see straight through her, and then in the last hour, she took that away from me. 2 nominations, 0 wins. She vanishes into that woman so completely that people forget there's an actress in there at all. And I spent years mistaking that for the absence of skill. Everybody's got a Janice in the family. That's why she works. And that's why I can't forgive her. So tell me in the comments, and be specific about it. That last scene, widow or angle? Tell me which one you think it is. And then tell me the exact moment in the series that made up your mind. Episode, scene, the whole thing. Because I've asked a lot of people this, and I've never had 2 of them give me the same answer. I've said my piece.